be commencing now. Um, okay, so my name is Olusegun. I'm taking you on the very fundamentals of CSS. So basically, I am sure that you guys are quite familiar with HTML. So we're going into CSS, like CSS Basics, the syntax and all, and we'll touch on basics of CSS. We'll touch on selectors. We'll also touch on using fonts, colors, background, border, the box model, CSS layouts, at least the very core ones, the good old floats, and also touch on inline elements, block elements, and all. So let me just share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let me create a new file. We call it so basically, so there are three ways of implementing CSS. So let me just rename it to implementing CSS, so that I think so there are three basic ways of implementing CSS. Let me think this should be right. So there are three basic ways of implementing CSS. We can use the inline style approach. Let me call it to okay. So I think I should just move this. So we can use the inline style approach. Inline style. So this works this way. So you're adding for the inline styles. So there are three ways of styling your CSS. You're using the inline styles. You can use the internal CSS approach or the external CSS. So the inline style is just you putting coding your CSS inside your HTML. So you're adding a style property, and let's give it a color red. All right. So this is the inline approach. The another approach is okay. So you can add a give the font family of there. I'll still explain what this font family does and all. So but this is the first and the old way. This is the first way of styling your HTML markup. But it's not really advisable to use this approach because it's industry standard is more favorable to separate concerns. So you want a situation whereby your CSS is separate from your HTML. You don't want both of them to be cluttered together. So another approach is the internal approach. So in that approach, you're going to add your style tag in your head, the header, in the head, and so let me give it a class of heading. So yeah, I can come here and I see h2 or even if okay, let me remove this first. Let me just style it this way first. So I can say h2 is color is green. So this is another approach to styling your. So you can see that here it's green, and so I can call this style inline internal CSS approach. So we are just basically styling the element style. Why am I typing like this? Element style. So but another approach also we can take, this approach is not bad, and this is what I'll be using going forward. But let me just show you the final approach. But at least for the purpose of this class, for the purpose of covering the very fundamental basics, I'll just favor this approach because it's easier for me to style my content at once rather than me having to switch between CSS files. But ideally, the next approach I'm going to show you is what is recommended, is the industry way of styling your content. So and the final approach is the external CSS. So to create an external CSS, you have to create a file index.css. So let's give this h3 some styling. So I can come here and say h3 is, let me give it the color of purple. You get? So let's see whether it reflects. Okay, so what do you notice? Notice that okay, despite the fact that I styled it purple, it's not reflecting. Why? Reason being is that we've just created an external CSS file, but there's no way this external file is being linked to this HTML. So how do we ensure that this style we've applied on this h3 reflects? How do we link it? So that's where we introduce the link attribute or the link tag. So the link tag is use the link, and okay, so there's this extension I installed. It's called emit. So it does auto completion. So rather than me having to now say link href blah 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 blah, you can just do your link and enter, and it will just auto complete it for you. So if you are curious and you want to find out, I think it's emit. Let me trying to check out the extension. So it's auto close, so you can maybe check for this auto close tag. The other ones like auto prefixer and all. Anyway, so how do we now link this external style sheet to what we have here? So we need to specify the link tag. So now we're just saying that, okay, what we are trying to link is a style sheet, is a CSS style sheet, and the href is now in this case going to be the source. Where is the location of this style sheet we are trying to link, or where is the location of this style sheet we are intending to link? So if you see, the style sheet is under so it's inside my CSS Basics. So we can go into CSS Basics, then you can see index of CSS. So once we add this line that links our HTML with this CSS, then we'll be able to see the color of purple. So you can see here it's now purple. So although it might seem that it's not purple, it might seem like it's a bit dark, it's looking black. So let me just change the color. So you can, let me change it to orange. So yeah, so these are 3 ways of linking of styling our web pages. So we have the inline style, we have the internal CSS approach, and we have the external CSS approach. For in a large code base, the standard way, like in production code or in software development, in the software industry, what they use is the external approach. So you would connect your CSS file to and link it with your HTML file. Reason being that it helps to separate concerns, as I mentioned earlier on. So you don't want your CSS and HTML to be mumbled up together. You want to have a location where all your CSS code resides, and you know that, okay, yes, this is strictly for CSS. This file is strictly contains CSS related codes, and this file I'm dealing with is only HTML based. So it's just to separate concerns, and it's a good practice to use the external CSS, the external CSS approach, linking your external CSS to your web page. But for the purpose of this class, I will just be sticking with the internal CSS approach, so that I don't have to be switching between one file to another file, as it might just be time consuming and all. So would rarely use this file, as we'll just be focusing on embedding it internally. So another thing we can also look at. So now basically we're just styling. We're styling using the element tag. So you can see that, okay, I just referenced h2 and all. So what if I put another h2, for example, now, and I call it another heading? You get, so this means that this h2 means it's a generic. It simply means that I'm going to style all the h2 elements in this HTML page, which means that both of them will have the same style. You get, so that means you can see it's green, but it's not in all cases we want to have both elements to have the same color. We might want to have a variation. We might probably want to have the other h2 to have a different color, or some sort of styling, different styling. So how do we now ensure that how do we ensure that, okay, we're not just selecting generically, we're selecting how can we make our code base more modular and compact? So that's where the class attribute comes into play. So now we can now add a class attribute here. So I can say class, let me call it heading, and I can now go here. So if I want to now style this h2 tag, having this class, rather than me styling the element directly, I can just, so now to start with the class, you need to add a dot and the name of the class, which is heading. So I want to give the color of red. No, let me just say indigo. Is there any color indigo? Yeah, indigo. So you can see, yes, I have this as red, I have this as green, I have this as indigo. So now I'm now styling differently as opposed to just styling all the H2 in the web page. So now there's also another one called let me call it ID. So there's also an ID attribute, and there's also called an attribute called class. So you can style your markups using IDs, you can style using class. So when should you use one over the other? Most times class is more popular. You use classes if you want to ensure that if you're sure that the same styling for this class can be reused, which means that, okay, rather than me having to now be styling the individual tag, I can just copy this class and I should have the same indigo here. So can you see? So classes are more often used if you want to apply the styles across several elements, and that's what we'll be using more often. But IDs are mainly used per page. You get, so it's just uniquely used, is used to uniquely identify a particular element. So I can't have another ID of this form. I can't have another ID and call it ID box. No, I need to give it another different element. So which means that I can decide to style this box in a different way from this box one by using the ID. But whereas if I'm using a class attribute, I'm going to give everywhere I'm using that class, this heading class, this heading class. That means everywhere I'm using it, everywhere it's being used is going to be affected. It's going to, the code is more it's reusable. Do you get? So that's the point I'm trying to emphasize. You use classes where you want to reuse the the code functionality across multiple elements. That's when you use classes. But if you want it to be unique to that element alone, if you want it to be unique to that element itself, that's when you use your IDs. So aside from classes and IDs, so if you want to style an ID, for classes you use a dot, for ID you use a pound sign. So pound sign and the name of the ID class, which is box. So we want to style this. So let me just give it a background of what color again should I give it? Then a navy blue. So can you see? So I can now say, okay, I want to give this box background of navy. I want to give the other box another background of blue. Let me see. Yeah. So now this using different IDs now distinguishes different, gives them like a different appeal. Whereas if I now want to now reuse the same functionality, reuse the same class across multiple elements, that's when I use the class attribute. I don't know if I'm making sense. So this is elements, this is class styling, this is ID styling. Can you guys hear me? Am I making sense? Do you guys understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Sorry?
Yes, we can hear you.
You guys understand like all this, like all the jargons I've been saying so far? Oh,
Yeah, I'm following.
sorry.
I'm following.
Okay. You guys have questions along the way, just you can signify like, yeah. So what else? So we've styled using the element approach. We've also been able to style using the class approach and ID approach. So another approach, what if now? Another approach is that we can also look at um, is using multiple selectors. Multiple selectors. How does this work? So let's say let me add a p element here. Sup close this. So let's say I want to style this p element. How do I, using the multiple selector, how do I style it? So I can style it. Multiple selector works in this way. So I can first start from the outer or the parent element and pick the element I'm interested in styling, which is the p tag, and I can give it, let me give it a font size of, just give it 30 pixels. So this should have a larger font size. Let me see. Yeah, 30 pixels. But what if I want to now what if I want both these p tags to have the same font size of 30 pixels? So what I can do is that I can add a comma here and say box 1 of p. So I'm saying that the p tag inside this box, this div, I want to give it a font size of 30 pixels, and also the p tag inside this box 1, I want to give it a font size. So I'm styling it together at once. That's why it's called multiple selectors. So both of them would have a font size of 30 pixels. Then there's also called nested selectors. Nested selectors, and it works in such a way. It's how do I explain? Okay, so it's in this approach, it's more like you are drilling. It's nested. Okay, so I want to style, let me add a span here. Let me just call it some text. So if I want to increase the font size of this span, the text inside this span, I'll have to go down from the ID, that will be box, down to the paragraph, down to the span. So you can see that, okay, ID is the parent, then the parent of this span is the paragraph, then down to the span. So that's why it's called nested selectors. So if I want to give it a font size of 20 pixels, let me make it more, or let me just give the color of red. Yeah, so you can see some text. So it's like I'm drilling down to my area of interest, to my area of focus. It's like a what's the word now? A style drilling, a nested drilling. So I'm starting from the root parent down to the sub parent, then to the child. So So they're like, these are probably the four most common ways of the other possible ways um to style your HTML pages, like multiple selectors, several selector approaches. But those ones will look at them maybe sometime later. They are more advanced. So, but these are the most popular ones that you guys should get familiar with. So you can style from H2 down to using the class styling, down to using the ID styling. Then you can use multiple selectors, and you can go nested. Yeah. So what else? You have no talking spoken about. So yeah, basically, so that's just what implementing CSS is all about. So let's look at let me create an file. Let me just call this one dev tools. Let me rename this. So for this, we're going to look at how to inspect our HTML pages on developer tools. So let me call this dev tools. I can even use this now. So okay, so this is, can use this. All right. So how do I inspect this HTML page? I can right click and just click inspect. I think there's a short command form. I think it's control, or mark is control command shift 9 or control shift 9. But if you want to know how to check your web pages on Chrome DevTools, you can just right click and inspect. So that means now this is all the CSS code on this web page. So you have your head, you have your body. So these are basically so you can see user agent styling. So these are browser default stylings. These are browser default stylings. We would come to a session where you can override these browser stylings. This is your, so you can see this is your margin, this is your border, this is your padding for this box. So the good thing is that you can actually play around and change all these stylings. So I can say, okay, I want to let me say, I can say, okay, I want to rename this to something else, some garbage. Can you see? And it's actually reflecting. So you can see the styling. You can see that, okay, this styling, this heading style is on, and you can see the reference, the HTML link reference is always on 01basics.html, which is the file we created here. And you can also see the color we applied, which is indigo. So now you can notice something, and let me explain something about specificity. You can see that this is a heading. Let me go back and show you something. So H2, I called it a color of green, and I call this a color of indigo. So heading is referring to this H2 class. So I style this H2, give this H2 class a style of indigo. So now you notice that this was this style, this was cancelled, which means that this styling, so there's something called specificity. Like so inline styles are more specific, they cannot be overwritten. class styles have higher precedence over the element styles. ID styles have higher precedence over class styles. Inline styles, inline stylings have the most specificity over all forms of stylings, be it um, your element styling, your ID and class. So let me show you a quick demo on what I'm saying, talking about. So let me create um and now let me just call this H4. I call it a style of, let me call this color what color should I give it again? Oh god, let's call it black. Test, just call it test purpose. So let me go here and get for, so and let me just put a little comment here. How do I, so inline stylings is greater than class stylings, and that one is greater than, no, it's greater than ID stylings, greater than class stylings, greater than element stylings. Yeah. So now to illustrate what I'm saying, if I'm giving this a color of black, and if I now want to change this color and call it purple, and call it, what color am I use again? Let me just call it coral, because this is more specific and because this one is of higher preference. This color will be black and not coral. So let me refresh so you can see this is black. So what if I made it if I added a class to it and call it h4, I call it h4 and give it a color of pink. This align styling also will still be black. The result will still be black because this is still of higher preference. So if you want to verify, it's still black. So but if I now remove this inline style, so now we have an element styling and we have a class styling, and class styling are more specific, so and they have a higher preference, order of preference, than element styling. So this will now be pink. So let's see. So can you see we have pink now in this case? So if we now decide to give it an ID of, let's call it h4, can't think of any name, so I can come here and say pound sign h4, color is yellow. So I expect that this color will kick in because this is of higher preference than the class and the element styling. So if I refresh, I get yellow. However, if I now return back my inline style and I put color color green, regardless of any of this, I expect that this would kick in because this is of what, higher specificity. So if I refresh, I get green. But now Now if I want to now ensure that that color cannot be changed again, if I want to ensure that that color cannot be changed again, so now if I go back here, I can use an important attribute, call it important. So if I apply important here, regardless of the ordering, this will kick in. Normally you expect that the inline style being green should be of the highest preference, highest specificity, but because we've explicitly declared it as important, which means that this value should never change. So I expect that this will now be yellow. So if I refresh, this is yellow because we've added this important flag. That means this will not kick in again. So this is the only exception. So if you want your style to never change, this is when you add the important attribute. So this is an exception. This is like a sort of like a caveat. So in this case, when you're adding an important flag, then this inline styling does not matter any longer. So, but if I remove it, then the inline style now takes precedence. It's green. What else? Okay, so let me go back to dev tools. I was explaining something on dev tools. Yes, so basically you can play with your dev tools. You can decide to tweak anything. So I can rename it to blah 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 blah, and it will reflect it. But the good thing is that this modifications is only visible to you locally. It's not, if you refresh the page, it resets. So you imagine if anyone can actually modify your web page just by opening the dev console. It's going to be the internet is going to be crazy. So but this modifications is just private to you and it's local to you, let me put it that way. So I can now decide to I can change the color. I don't want indigo, I want to call it violet. So you can see it's violet. I can give it a font family. Let me give it a font size of font size of 50 pixels. 50 pixels, you can see this, and so yeah. I just thought that you guys should have an idea of how to inspect. I think it makes a lot more sense. It makes a lot of sense to know how to inspect your web pages. So if you click on this box ID, you can see the CSS that is applied to it. So the CSS is coming from the HTML web page. Since we actually embedded it in that internally, as you can see, is to show you the link to where this CSS is being applied. So we can also, and here you, like I mentioned earlier, you can see user agent style sheet. This is default browser styling, and there's a way you can actually override it when we come to the aspect of box models. I will show you how to override all these browser stylings and all. That's it for DevTools. So let's look at another topic. Let's look at let's look at fonts and colors. Let's call it fonts colors.html. Call it fonts and colors style. Let me just copy this can just paste it here. So font and colors, we can let's say we want to style this. You can give it a font family of, and so you can see a lot like the font stacks. There are several fonts we can give it. There's Coral, New, Monospace. So I love to use Arial vertical sans serif. So you can give it a font family of this. You can give it a font size of, so by default the default font size is 1 pixels, sorry I said 16 pixels or 1 rem, but we'll look at rem later. Rem is 16 pixels, so this is the default font size. So you can, let me open this web page, don't want to get overly complex. So if I open this, you see that the styling is just the same as before. If I remove this, there's no so much difference, but if I decide to increase it, so let me say 20, what the heck just happened? Okay, this is not really visible. Let me give it like some 25. Yeah, you can see that it's quite larger. Oh, let me use this then. Let's give it a 40 to make it bigger. Yeah, so so you can aside from this, you can also give it a, let me add some text here again. Let me add another text. Let's say I want to give, you can give it a line height. So line height is just spacing between the elements. So I can say a line height of 1.5 is it monosable to m, so you can let me give it 5 yeah. So if I want to give some spacing between two contents, that's when you use the line height. So the default is 1.4, but you can use 1.6. so there's another way you can actually you can import your font if you don't want to use the default font stacks. So these are font stacks. So for example, now if what this means is that if some browsers do not support Arial, it would default to a vertical. If a vertical is not supported in some browsers, it will default to sans serif, but this Arial will kick in first. So if I remove Arial, I expect that sans serif should kick in. If I remove sans serif, I expect that Helvetica, I expect that sans serif kicks in and all. So now approach is using embedding fonts using Google Fonts. So we can go to Google. Let me show you how to use it. Google dot, I think it's Google Fonts. Yeah, so this is font.google. Am I in the wrong? Zero. Fonts.google.com. Yeah. So there are several fonts. So this is where you can actually, if you're not really interested in using all these fonts that's being provided by the browser, you can actually import your own font. So you can import your font using the link style or import it as a CSS. But I'll show you how to use the link approach. So there are several font styles you can use. There's Roboto, Open Sans, there is Lato. I'm a big fan of Roboto. I love using the Roboto font. So let's see how to add this. So we can copy this, and so it shows us how to even use it. Copy the link to this external font and specify it and apply the rule set, which is apply the font family. So I can simply copy this here, and so I can copy this instead. So instead of me using the default font that the browser provides for me, I can use the external imported font. So if I refresh, I should get yeah, is Roboto. Let me increase. Yeah, so this is, let me change the font so that okay, let me just apply some other. Okay, so I can this. So I can give it like, I'll give a font weight of let me give it a bold font weight of bold. So you can see this is it. You can see the font is slightly different from the previous font. So yeah, so these are now way of you, if you want to you want to import an external font. So if you feel you're not satisfied with what is being provided and you want to use some external font, this is a good resource to get your get some external fonts and stuff. So let's look at colors. Let me just call this a class of text. Class of text. So there are different ways you can actually style your colors. So you can use the normal approach to just specifying the color, whether it's red, green, blue, yellow. You can use the RGB, of which we've done earlier. We can use the RGB approach. So it takes in three values: 255, 255, 255. So this RGB has the value, it ranges from 0 to 255. So if it's 255, 255, which will give you a color of white. If it's 255, 0, it gives you a color of yellow. So if I refresh, you can see it's yellow. If I give this a 0, it gives me red. So rather than you specifying red, you can just specify the RGB equivalent, and gives you this color. There's another approach. You can also use the X approach, the hexadecimal approach. So this one is let me hexadecimal format. So this takes in, so you can specify values from 0 to 9 and A to F. Use your hexadecimal values in mathematics, if you guys can remember, or hexadecimal system rather. So I can decide to give it F. Let me see. So this gives me white. So this is equivalent to RGP of 255, 255, 255. If I want to, I can change it to FF A. So you can play around with it. But if everything is, if you are writing FF, I want to, there's a short form to this. So rather than me writing it in, I can just, if everything is all, they're the same, I can just shorten it to 3 letters, 3 characters. So if I'm now saying, so this and this, they're the same. Yeah. So that's basically for fonts and colors. What else have I not touched on? So there's also like CSS units, like so I use the font size of 40 pixels, but there are also other various CSS units that I didn't cover, or that is worth to know, sure, but it's not important. The most important ones is what I've. So you have your you have centimeter, millimeter, you have inches, you have points, you have pixels. So but pixels is what is most commonly used. How do you see a website using centimeter, 40 cm, or 40 millimeter, or 40 inches? Like, it's pixels. At times you see points, but most times it's generally it's pixels. That's default you use. So these are CSS absolute units. Let me call them. Let me just put here, say CSS absolute unit. So we also have CSS relative units, but we're not going to cover that now. That's when we're doing some. That will be later on. So that's it about fonts and colors. You guys, if you can explore, I'll send you guys materials later on to read further. But that's basically it. There's nothing big. There's nothing else you need to know about fonts and colors. So let's look at another topic. Let me just call it backgrounds and borders. Background. So let me just borrow from here. Let me borrow this from here. Lazy to type. Apologies. Just duplicate this. See, this top is not duplicating here. Okay. So let me also call it a class. So background and borders. So you can give it, let me show you how to style borders. um let me flesh out this. Let me give it a background color of red. Okay. Padding, there I'll explain padding and all next. 20 pixels. Margin, let me give it 10 pixels. Okay, so basically this background, and now you can specify it. You can just call it background color or background. So you can also, if I want to give some, this color is so harsh, let me give it a blue. If I want to give a border to everything, I can call, so that I need to specify the border width. Let me call it 2 pixels. Border style. So there are different border styles. There's solid, there's dotted, and one other one, but the most common one is solid. And the border color. Give it F4. Let me choose a color picker of this. So you can see like a border around each of the boxes. Let me increase the border width so this is now visible. So you can see a border around these boxes. So what if we now want to, this is like a first approach. What if I want to write it using one line? I don't want to now write it, give it a border width. And now another way of writing this, I can just say give it a border. I'll specify the width, which is 40 pixels, specify the style solid, specify the color 585555. So this approach and this approach they're the same, but this is just a lot more cleaner. So you can see that this is the same. So what if I want to give some rounded corners around these edges? The edges are very pointed. I want to make it rounded corners. So this is where you use your border radius. Your border radius, let me just give it 5 pixels, for example. So you can see that yes, this was pointed before, but you can see the edges a bit curvy, but let me make it more pronounced, more visible. So you can see the edges now are now rounded. But there are cases whereby you don't want the whole 4 edges to be rounded. You just want only this left edge to be rounded, and the remaining ones are pointed. So rather than specifying the border radius, we can also specify border. Border top left radius and give it 20 pixels. So here, this is the only, so I'm saying border top, give a border radius at the top left. So just make this top left only rounded, the other edges are sharp, are pointed. So if I want to make this rounded, it's a matter of me just saying border right, top right. So I have both my top left and top right rounded. What else? So I'm specifying my margin as 20 pixels. So this margin of 20 pixels means 20 pixels on all sides, padding on all sides. So padding is just the spaces around the content. Let me inspect, let me show you what I mean. So can you see this is padding. This is the content itself. Padding is just the spaces. So you can see that it's 20 pixels. I'm specifying just 20 pixels, but it's giving it a 20 pixels of on the top, on the right, on the bottom, and the left, on all sides. So, but another way of writing this, I can just say rather than just writing it 20 pixels, I can say 20 pixels, 20 pixels. Same thing as 20 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels. Still the same thing. So what if I want to give adjustment and I'll say okay, so this means that okay, 20 pixels at the top, 20 pixels at the right, 20 pixels at the bottom, 20 pixels at the left. So if I want to reduce the padding between the right and left to 10, I'll just change it to 10. And if I refresh, you can see that okay, I have what my padding at the left and right is now reduced to 10, while the padding, the space around the content, padding is just the space around the content. The padding around the content is what 20, while the padding around the content towards the left and right is 10. So the same approach also applies for margin. So this margin is margin on all sides. Margin on all sides. So but now let me, so as you can see, I gave it a margin. So margin is simply just the space between two. Let me inspect. Margin is simply the space between two containers. So you can see this is a box, this is another box. You can see a space, a small space here. So that is margin. It's just a space between two elements, two containers. So this is a box, this is another box, and the space of margin of 10 pixels. Let me increase it to make it more visible. So I'm giving it a margin of 50 pixels. So can you see? So you can see here, this is 50 pixels, and this is also what 50 pixels also. So but what if, yeah, so if you want to now be more specific, you don't want it to be just all, you don't want it to be 50 pixels on all sides. You want to now reduce the margin spaces on specific sides. So that's when you can now use this approach. So this approach is just, let me put a comment here, is 20 pixels top, 20 pixels top, 10 pixels right, 20 pixels bottom, 10 pixels left. Yeah, yeah, basically. So another stuff we can look at is, let's look at background. So how do we insert images into a web page? Let me just create, another class, call it, or let me just create an ID for this. Just call it, can call it div, yeah, so box 1. Copy this. So how do we insert, how can I ensure that the background, as opposed to, we're using color so far, but if I want this background, this box background, to be an image, so there's something that we can use. So we can style it box 1. So we grab the ID selector, which is this, and we can now give it a background think it's a URL or the background, so we can specify the URL. So this one takes a path, so we need to specify the reference to where the image is linked to. So the image in this case, we need an image one, so we can go here to images and let me grab image one. So you can see the image here, but it's not, you can't really see everything. So let me add some height. Let me give it a height of 400 pixels. Give it a width of, let me just give it 400 pixels. So you can see the image, but so we can also add, let me make it more bigger. Let me just give it 1000. Yeah, so actually this background is actually repeating. It's based on the, okay, let me use, or should I use on that image? Okay, let me use, okay, so if you don't want the background to repeat, we can use a background repeat. Is no repeat. We can also use a background position. So this will be let me give it 50%. So this is actually, this is 50% from the x-axis, and this is the distance. This values, two values. This first value is the distance from the x-axis, is this second value distance from the y-axis. So let me just give it, let me use pixels first, 100 pixels and 0 pixels. So it's 100 pixels from the left, so you can see it just shifted from the left. So if I increase it to 500 pixels, it's 500 pixels from the left and 0 pixels from the top. But if I want to reduce the distance from the top, let me give it a 50 pixels from the top. So you can see that the image has, there's a distance of 50 pixels from the top. I can give it 100 pixels from the top, 100 pixels. But it's the default. If you want to center the background, one can use a center. So you can see that we are gradually seeing the image, but I want the image to fit this size. We can see that we can't actually see the whole image. This is the actual image. I want everything to be visible, and whereas a part of the image is being cropped out. How can we ensure that the whole image fits the allowed width? How do we ensure that? That's when we use the background size. So we can now use cover. So once you apply this, the old pictures will now show on the specified width that we've declared. So yeah, so another way of rewriting all this gibberish is we can actually rewrite this as this. So we can say background is the URL itself, then repeat, no repeat, center cover. Okay, I'm not meant to apologies, I'm not meant to. Yeah, this is still meant to remain. So yeah, we have this. So this and this, they are the same. This is just like a simpler way of writing background repeat, background position, background size. It's just we're writing in this way. So we are saying, okay, use the background URL of specify the path of the image, ensure that this image is not repeated. We just want a single image. We don't want it to repeated. The position of the image should be center across that width and height we specified, and the whole image should be viewable. No part of the image should be cropped. That's when we use the background size cover. So yeah, so that's basically about backgrounds and borders. So what we can look at again is let's look at let's look at what have I covered. Let's do like box model. Yeah, box model. Box model. Let me borrow this. So basically, box model is just boxes. It's simply boxes around elements. So every element in a web page is enclosed inside a box. Okay, what am I saying? Let me inspect and show you. That's simply every element is a box. That's just the idea. So you can see that this is simply a box. If I inspect, it's still a box. I expect it's still a box. Yeah, so that's what box model means. Simply just every element in a web page is simply enclosed inside a box. That's like the high level definition. So let's look at. So if you remember, I remember mentioning that there were some browser defaults. Yeah, so by default every element has some browser styling defaults. You can see user agent styling, which this is the default styling. So every element, every tag, so you can see for this h2 tag, this is default styling. How to confirm if it's a default styling? If anywhere you see user agent style sheets, just notice that these are browser default stylings. So this h2 has a default browser stylings, but it's not in all cases we might want to use the default stylings. So there's a way we can reset it. If we want to have, how do we ensure that we have control over our own stylings? You get, because if we want to bank on the default stylings later on when we are making complicated web pages, all these browser stylings will come into play, and they can be a nightmare to debug. So most times the normal standard practice is to reset all the default stylings to a default value so that you can have control over for all elements. That means you want to reset all elements default browser stylings to a default value so that you can have control over your own stylings. So how do we achieve that? We can actually achieve that by using this universal tag. Is called the asterisk. So this asterisk means that select all tags. So what this means is that select all tags, set their. So you can see that, for example, this margin, this has some margin this H2 has some margin of 0.83 margin and some all. So if I want to set it to default, I can set it to 0. I can set, so if I refresh, okay, let me look for, yeah, so you can see that this p tag has some margin of 16 pixels. So these are default. You can see this is margin block stats. So 1M is actually 16 pixels. It's equivalent to 16 pixels. So these are default browser styles. But in many cases, you want to have full control over your styling. So we can set the padding and padding to 0. So in this case, yeah, so we have our margin padding to 0. Let me get rid of this. Let me just use a class. Yeah. Okay, I get it. I see now. So I'm using the wrong. Let me open it. I was just wondering what was happening. Yeah. So let me show you what I was referring to. So you can see that yes, this p tag has what some defaults, a margin of 1 pixels, which is equivalent to 16. H2 has some default font size, has a default margin, that's a default of, well, all this can be reset to 0. So if I refresh, so you can see now all the margin is now 0 for the H2. The p tag also, everything is now what, 0, which was 16 before. So we now have control over ours. So basically this is what is called CSS reset. So you use it basically. CSS resets are actually useful when you want to have full control over your stylings, because later on when you are designing complicated web pages, all this margin and padding they come into play, and most times it can be hard to debug. So it's usually a good rule of thumb to just reset your margin and padding to the default value, so that you can have full control over them. So let me give it this box some stylings. So let me just say padding, background of just like red, padding of 20 pixels, margin of 10 pixels. So let's inspect this. So we're giving it a margin of 10 pixels. So margin is just the space around the border. Do you get? The space between, margin is simply, like I mentioned earlier, margin is just the space between two elements. Your padding is the space around the content, and your border is the space outside of the content. So if I now give it, now if I increase this padding to, let me give it a width of 600 pixels. Let me give it a width of 400 pixels height. So I'm giving a padding of 20. So I'm giving it a width of 400 pixels. But if I increase the padding now to 100, can you see I've given it a fixed width of 400, but if I increase the padding, you notice that the width is increased. But that should not be the case. The width should always be fixed. I made a fixed width of 400 pixels, and the padding, if you notice, by increasing the padding is essentially increasing the width of this container. So how do we now ensure that the width always remains fixed? So a way to ensure that the width always remains fixed is when we use the box sizing property. So if we use the box sizing of border box, so regardless of the padding, this ensures that the width always remains 400 pixels. So if we increase the padding, so you can see that if I remove the box sizing, the padding would add to the width, which will expand the width. So you can see that the width has already expanded, but ideally box sizing, we don't want the padding to contribute to the width of the box. We want the padding we want the width to be constant, to remain constant. So we use the box sizing to cater for this edge case. So this most times, so when you are building projects, these resets are usually very important. The box sizing, padding, and margin. So they are called CSS resets. Yeah, so this is just like a high level overview. Like this is just like the basics you need to know about box model and all. I don't know if are you guys understanding what I'm saying like this? But can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
You guys understand all what I've been explaining so far?
For me, I think
Sorry?
I understand to a good extent. So I think for me, I understand to some extent. But what I would just really just to also like go over it again.
Okay, again, Dory. Okay, I'll give you guys an assignment afterwards. So, Dory, all this would, the more you practice, the more you get used to it, and it becomes second nature. So, Dory, you get a hang of it by practicing more. It's not a difficult topic to master. So let's look at float and alignment. So let me just give it float alignment. Float. So I'm using an emit. So rather than me having to write documents, blah 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 blah, you can also use a exclamation and hit enter, and this generates like a boilerplate for you to write your code. So let's call it float alignment. So let's look at this. So there are three key ways to the first float and alignment is basically used to center, basically used to style, to basically layout approaches to they are basically used to layout or structure your web layout pages to get. They are aside from floats, you have flexbox, you have grid. Yeah, but I think during the from the since the inception of the web, float was what was used to structure layout. So it makes sense to have an idea of how to use float, although float is no longer used. Like nowadays, is flexbox and CSS grid that's being used. But let me just show you a code sample explanation of how float works. So let me copy this. Let me just div container box 1, box is box 2, two, 3, 4. So let me style this container. My god. Container, we have width of, let's give it 960 pixels, margin 0 to, I think this should keep it. So let me refresh, let me remove this and open it. So what I've simply done is I've given, let me just give a border 1 pixel solid so you can see what I'm doing. So can you see? So I've given it a width of 960 pixels and margin of 0 auto means from the top and bottom, center it from center it. Margins 0 auto just means center it from the left and the right, so it will center the div, you center the container both sides equally. So margin this of this 0, margin of 0 means the top and bottom will be 0. So if I want to make it 30 pixels, that means I want to give a space of 30 pixels at the top and bottom. Is it 20 pixels rather? So if I give it 30 pixels, I'm simply saying 30 pixels from the top and bottom. Let me say 50 pixels from the top and the bottom. But let's see now. So in responsive design, if I inspect this page, for example, you'll notice something. For smaller sizes, screen sizes, you can see that there are some certain parts of the pages, certain part of the content that you can't see. You get it. The more we shrink it, the more you can't see some certain part of the content. And which is not supposed to be so. For smaller screen sizes, it should fit the viewport. So can you see? Let me go. Let me switch. So if you want to change the phone views, you can click on here and select. So that means this web page, for example, on iPhone SE, this is how it's going to look like. On Samsung Galaxy 8, this is how it's going to look like. You can see some part of the content are not showing, and there's a fix for it. So what we can actually do is, rather than using the width property, we can just use max width. So max width ensures that the content is responsive across various screen sizes. So if I refresh, if I refresh now, and if I now try to now go for two smaller sizes, you can see that the content is trying to shrink to ensure that everything is now fitting the content. But if I remove it now, can you see the content is worn out? So this is a fix to ensure that max width. We use the max width to ensure that okay, the layout is responsive across various widths. So I'm sure this is like a mobile view, this is like a tablet view, and the full screen is a desktop view. So this is now this is responsive now, as opposed to when we're using the width property. So let me style. Another thing you guys need to know is okay, let me just style this content. Let me style this, so I can give it a box. So I'm using a box. You can see I'm using a box across because I want to give this box, I want them to share a particular styling. That's why I'm using a class in this case. So I can say okay, is there a question or something? Okay. Tokbe, do you have a question or what? Tokbe, do you have a question?
No, sir, it's not a question. I'm just saying the class is well detailed. They are well done.
Okay. So let me style the box. Let me give it a, just give it a color, background color first. Background of orange. Let me see. So this orange. Okay. Let me give you some padding of 10 pixels. Okay, so I need to give some margin. Margin of, give it 10 pixels. Okay, so we can give some border radius of 10 pixels. All right, so so how do we apply floats in this scenario? So what we can do, we can go to box, box 2, and give it a float right. So I want to ensure that, so let me first comment this first. I want to restructure this layout, because we use floats for layout restructuring. So I want to restructure this layout using float. So how do I do it? So we specify float right. That means I want box 2 to move towards the right hand side, but should still be within this confinement, this width confinement. But if you notice something, you can see that box 2 is overlapping. So but then we will fix the overlapping. So we can actually specify the width of box 2 to be let me give it 60 degrees. So this is 60 degrees of the container width. So I can give it a box. Let me go to box 3, or let me see this float left rather. So let me give box 3 float right. What am I doing? Give it a width of So I'm taking 60% width of this container size, which is 960. So the remaining percent will be 30%. So let me first comment this. I'll explain what I'm doing. So you can see now, box 2 has 60%, box 3 has. So this is a way of like aligning your content using floats, and it's very painful. You need to specify floats. You need to now specify the width of this element you're trying to float. So I'm saying float this element to the left and give it 60% of the container width, of the maximum width which is specified here. Remember that this is container which houses everything. So I'm now saying for box 3, float it to the right and take the remaining 30% of the container width, which is what we get here. So this is how to actually align content, or to structure content using float. So if we add another box now, for example, you can see that it scatters everything. Now how do we now get a fix for this? So what we can do here is we need to use a property called clear. So what we need to do is we need to specify this property here. Yes, so which means that, okay, after you floated these two boxes, clear it, give a space, and give a space or give a room for this element to take its own space. So if you go back, you can now see that this element is now structured in its own within the space, within the confinement of the container, the parent container. So if I remove this clear, so this clear means clear both float in the two boxes, in box 2 and box 3. So this will now give a room, or give a space, give a room for the fourth container to find expression, or to have a room, to a space. But if I remove this clear, this is like a hack. It's actually painful, like, because this is how layouts were being structured before Flexbox and CSS came to be. So if I remove this clear, you can see that it's just rumpled off. You can't really tell where box 4 is. So if you're adding more boxes, that's how you have to now be using using this approach, this hacking approach, to ensure that everything is well structured. So if let me add another box, for example. Now let me call it box 5. Okay, so let me call this box 6. Okay, so now if I want to now align, I want to now change the layout to look like this, and I need to now follow the same approach I used here. So I can now come to box 5 and now say box 5 float left, then width 60. Sorry, my battery is running down. Some minutes, please. My battery is trying to log right. Yeah. So float left 60%. Block 6. Float right width is 30%. So if I refresh, okay, let me give some space. So let me reduce the so you can imagine this is the stress of going through floats. It's never recommended. Think yeah, so now we've now been able to structure a layout using floats. So you can see the pane. When I'm showing you guys how to use flexbox and grid, is a lot more easier. Like all this stretch, we won't have to be using float left, float right, clear. Now if I want to add another box now, I need to now specify the clear fix that I did earlier on. You can see that this one would just mumble on this box. So you can see it's now like scattered the orientation. So I now need to now add a clear here. So can you see? So you can imagine styling. You are doing a complex page and you're having to use float to do this. It is just going to it's a nightmare. So it's not this was how the layout of pages were being done before CSS Flexbox and Grid came into being. But I would show you guys how to use CSS and Flexbox later on in the lecture. So basically, that's how float and alignment basically works. I think one final thing we'll treat is let's look at inline styles, inline and block styles, inline and block elements, inline block element. So looking at inline and block style elements, or better still, what we'll do is I'll give you assignments, make research on inline block. You get? So we'll just continue from inline and block elements later on. I think we spent quite some time. So we'll continue from this later on. Do you guys have any questions? You guys have any questions?
Not for now, but if I have any, I think I'll drop it on the group.
Okay. So we'll continue from there. We'll pick up inline blocks in our next class, and we'll touch on some other stuff before we pick up CSS Flexbox and all. So it was nice having you guys. Hope you guys understood my jargons and all. So you guys can always go through the videos too. you guys can always go through videos to refresh to refresh what, if there's any like on anything that is not clear enough, you can always watch the video. So another thing I'll do is I'll send reference links to the channel that you guys can use to support, that would aid in helping you guys grasp this concept much more better. And after our next class, there will be an assignment, a project to work on. So we're going to use all the concepts we've learned to build a small project. Yeah. So good night. See you guys when we see. Yeah. Take care.
Okay, sir. Bye.
Bye.